Alright, hey guys, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at a clone of the Game Boy Color called the GBboy Color. It's a really low cost clone and even comes with a built-in backlight, so let's take a look. Alright, so this is going to be another super detailed in-depth review, so if you don't care about all the details, just go ahead and use the links in the description and you can skip to whatever part you're interested in. Alright, let's go ahead and jump into this review. Now I know with a lot of you, the first question is going to be, why would you even want to buy a clone Game Boy Color? Why not just buy a real Game Boy Color or even a Game Boy Advance with a backlight built in? Well, there's a few reasons why. After the release of Pokemon Go, pretty much all the Pokemon games, as well as the Game Boys themselves, had a pretty big price hike. So because of that, this unit's quite a bit cheaper than even buying an official Game Boy in some cases. The cheapest Game Boy you can buy with any type of light built in will be the standard Game Boy Advance SP. Not only is that unit around $50 now, but also it comes with a front light. While front lights do help you see the screen better in the dark, they don't give you very good contrast and the overall picture looks a little bit washed out. Also, for some people, especially people with bigger hands, the GBA SP is just not really comfortable. It's too thin and the buttons feel kind of weird in comparison to the older Game Boy models. However, modding will open more opportunities. You can mod a Game Boy Advance Classic to have the backlit screen from the later GBA SP models, and you'll have a nice, comfortable way to play your games. Unfortunately, the kits that do these mods are kind of expensive. The original Game Boy also had a backlight mod. It was much cheaper, but quite a bit harder to install. Also, even if you did mod one, you'd still be locked to playing original Game Boy games, no Game Boy Color and no Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Color also has a screen mod, but unfortunately it's only front light, just like the original GBA SP. It's not too expensive, and the install is a little bit tricky, but doable, but unfortunately the finished product is pretty much just like the GBA SP, a little bit washed out, and the colors aren't too great. There were some third-party accessories that will allow you to light up your Game Boy without even opening it up, but those would tend to drain your battery or require extra batteries, and overall they just glare up your screen so you'd have a hard time seeing anything. So simply put, with this $30 handheld, you're getting something that would cost you around $100 if you were to buy it officially. So let's see how the rest of it holds up. Alright, so that last section was pretty long, but hopefully it heavily emphasizes just how big a deal a backlit screen on a Game Boy Color is. So let's move on to the actual design of the product. The design is actually very close to that of the original Game Boy Color. Aside from it just looking a little bit wider, you still got your D-pad in the same place, B and A buttons, and select and start. But you will notice the buttons look quite a bit different. And they feel a bit different too. The D-pad is larger and is a little bit raised. It also has this kind of weird curved design to it. The A and B buttons themselves are okay, and they seem to have a little bit more tactile feedback, which is pretty cool. And the start and select buttons are actual plastic buttons now, and they're a little bit bigger too. It makes them easier to press, but they do feel a bit clicky. But they really did a good job of copying the overall design. If you weren't looking at these side by side or you couldn't see the GBboy logo, you'd probably think this was an actual Game Boy Color. It's just as comfortable as a normal Game Boy Color, and heck, even the battery covers are compatible. Alright, now let's talk about gameplay. If you remember from my older video, there are three different types of games that can be used in the Game Boy Color. There's the classic black and white games, there's the dual mode or DX games, and then there's the Game Boy Color games. All three types of games work just fine in this unit, but not every game ran without issues. Only had some minor issues with a few games, but that will be covered in more detail under sound issues and screen issues. I found that games with special hardware work too, so if your game has a rumble pack or any other special accessory like that, it will actually boot up and run on this unit. Even some unofficial, non-licensed hardware runs on this. I was able to run this Monster Brain, which is a cheat device / backup device, so that means that Game Sharks and Mega Memory cards should work as well. I even tested its USB flash cart, so if you happen to be trying to play some ROM hacks, they'll run just fine on this thing too. But with a bigger, stiffer D-pad, I did notice some minor issues when transitioning between certain diagonal directions. This only really affects racing games and fighting games, but it is important to keep in mind. Platformers and adventure games work just fine though. All the games I tested run at full speed, and just like with a real Game Boy Color, you can change the color palette when you first start up the game. Alright, let's talk about the built-in games. On the box they claim 188 games in one, and all you have to do to access those games is just turn on your console without any game in, and you'll be presented with a list. Unfortunately there's only 66 games, but there are a few big names in there, like Super Mario Land, Dr. Mario, and even DuckTales. None of them support saving, and they're all classic black and white Game Boy games. This is possibly to save space, but it's probably also because many multi-carts don't actually support having Game Boy Color games and original Game Boy games on them at the same time. One thing I was very worried about was multiplayer. Some clone cartridges have non-working or just really bad link ports, but I was happy to see that I was able to use multiplayer with this device. Even when playing the built-in copy of Tetris, I was able to connect up to my own physical copy of Tetris on my Game Boy Advance. And if your link cable supports it, you can even connect it to the original Game Boy. And yes, of course, multiplayer definitely works when playing from cartridge to cartridge as well. It's just really surprising to see that even the built-in games support multiplayer. Now let's talk about the screen. The resolution and aspect ratio aren't exactly the same, so some things may look a little bit stretched. But even inside with the lights on, the screen looks dramatically better on the GB Boy when compared to a real Game Boy Color. It's clearer, more crisp, and definitely more vibrant. Now if you're one of the lucky people to have a Backlit Game Boy Advance or Backlit Game Boy Classic, you will notice that the Game Boy Advance official screen is still quite a bit more vibrant than GB Boy Color. But when you consider the price difference, I'm not sure I'd say it's 4 times as good. And when compared to the original SP, it's just no contest whatsoever. The GB Boy Color completely blows it out of the water. But as much as I like the screen, it does have one major disadvantage, and that's the viewing angles. While the horizontal viewing angles are okay and pretty close to that of the original Game Boy, the vertical viewing angles are pretty strict compared to the original screen. While this may be okay for most people, it does get kind of annoying sometimes, especially if you try to play Kirby's Tilt and Tumble, which is borderline unplayable with this screen. Another strange issue I had was after a few hours of testing this device, the screen just turned white. I tried turning it off and turning it back on again, but it just turned straight white. There was no boot logo or anything. Apparently this is the device's way of telling you the battery is very low. If the voltage is too low, the backlight will still turn on, but the rest of the unit will not. It was pretty freaky because at first I thought I broke it, but as soon as I replaced the batteries it was back to normal. I had another weird issue with the GB Boy Color too. Once every couple times I put it in a game and boot it up, the screen would just be really bright. I'm talking overly bright. Like look at this, the entire thing looks like it's like overexposed or something. I don't know why this would happen. All I have to do is take out the cartridge and put it back in, it will usually be fine. After checking online and seeing nobody else has the issue, I'm guessing it's just a defect of my specific model. It would only happen like once every 5 or 10 times I insert a game, but I still felt like it was worth mentioning. The next thing I wanted to test was sound quality of headphones. I wanted to see if it sounded any better on headphones than it did on a speaker. Here's what happened when I plugged in headphones. Yep, it's playing from both the speakers and the headphones at the same time. Nobody else online seems to be having this problem, so I'm guessing it's just my unit. I could probably fix this myself, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. Alright, now for a quick sound test. Unfortunately, this camera didn't do a great job of picking up the audio quality, so for the music portion I'll be recording directly from the actual headphone port of the device. Then I'll play it over the video footage. While the music's not quite the same as the original Game Boy, I consider it to be pretty close and acceptable. But as you heard, Pokemon Crystal version has a kind of unique issue where it doesn't play any of this cries for the Pokemon on your side of the field. This issue is not unique to Pokemon Crystal version, but most of the other games I tested didn't have any issues. The only other one I can think of is Pac-Man. Not only is the pitch off, but after just a few seconds, the normal Pac-Man pellet eating, or whatever you call it, stops working as well. It's very strange. Alright, we covered all the big stuff, let's just cover some smaller stuff. As you can probably tell from looking through the plastic on this model, unlike the real Game Boy Color, this doesn't have an infrared transmitter or receiver. That's not really a big deal, it wasn't used in many games. And if you do manage to accidentally go to the infrared section of your game, it won't crash or anything, you'll just get a communication error after a few seconds. This unit's size and weight are both very close to the original Game Boy, the weight's off by less than an ounce. And for battery life, my multimeter said it actually required just a little bit more power than the Game Boy Color. around 115 milliamp hours, sometimes jumping a little over 120, but usually staying around there. And from my 1900 milliamp hour rechargeable batteries, I was able to get about 10.5 hours before I got a white screen, so not bad, especially for a backlit clone console. So, how do you go about buying one of these things? Well, you can find them on Amazon for about 60 bucks. Yeah, that's a bit high. eBay at least sells them for the $40 range, but if you want the lowest price, you have to go to a site called AliExpress. While they may not have the best reputation, they do have the best price. And just by looking at a listing, you can see which seller has the best feedback score. They're actually tiered. You got medals, jewels, and crowns. And in each tier there's multiple steps. More medals and you get a jewel, more jewels and you get a crown. It sounds very silly, but it is kind of helpful. However, some sellers have an interesting way of influencing you to give good ratings. But I ordered online from a crown seller, I even used my own credit card. And aside from the small issues I had, it works pretty well. If you want to save a little bit more money, you can sign up with a site called Giving Assist. They give you cash back on purchases from multiple sites, and you can get $5 back from your first order on AliExpress. So technically I only paid $25 total for this item, including shipping. Okay, so final thoughts. This is actually a pretty good Game Boy clone, I think. No, if you're a Game Boy purist, of course you won't like this, but I think this is for more than just a casual user too. The backlit screen is actually really nice, even if the aspect ratio is not perfect. And yeah, the sound issues are kind of annoying, but think about it this way. It's a $25 clone console. You can literally take it anywhere without having to worry about losing it or getting it broken. Have a long train or bus ride ahead? Well, just take this with you. It will last quite a while on just 2 AA batteries. Do you have a kid who you're trying to get interested in old games? Well, here's the perfect way to do it. It has a backlit screen so they can play it anywhere, and it's cheap and easy to replace. While this thing does have some minor issues, it's cheap, but hey, it plays the games. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. Well, that's all I got for this video. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.